want to make a lot of money, right? But creating something, that's hard. Like, you can put your heart, soul, and other people's money into something new just for no one to care. So instead, why not cash in on nostalgia? If people are fondly looking back at a certain time or property, it means you have an almost guaranteed audience, meaning your worst case scenario would be far more manageable. Hence the last decade of media, which has seen countless reboots and revivals that have caused millions of millennials to collectively go, I mean, alright, it's nice to see where everyone ended up, I guess. But one show in particular just hasn't managed to cross the line to reboot land, and ironically, it's the kind of show that seems perfect for it. Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide was a successful Nickelodeon sitcom that ran in the mid-2000s, and the premise set itself up perfectly for a long run.
Ned Bigby, that's me, and my two best friends try to do the impossible. Create a guide that will help you survive school.
So logically, a show like this seems like it would have the potential to be something like Boy Meets World meets Sweet Life. I mean, both properties focus on following their protagonists from childhood to young adulthood and the challenges that evolve over time.
He's a teacher, man. Keep ragging on him. He's gonna make your whole 6th grade year miserable.
Alcoholism is in our family, and you shouldn't drink.
Sean?
And why can't Ned learn how to survive high school or college? Not to mention that feeling lost and without guidance is a huge part of adulthood. But instead, the show just ended once the characters approached the end of 8th grade.
And we all live happily ever after.
And it never turned into any kind of franchise. So nearly 2 decades later, the series' 3 main actors decided to start one of the many rewatch podcasts taking over Spotify.
Guess what? We have a podcast now. Ned's Declassified Podcast Survival Guide, where we talk about the making of our favorite moments, things we remember from that time in our lives, and also tangents about our adult lives.
And while this idea was initially met with some enthusiasm, the internet has since completely turned on them.
You and them 2 funny looking boys over there on their podcast get on here and commiserate about that damn show that we barely even remember every day. We are not interested in that show anymore. We're grown. We're like 30 plus now.
With people begging them to just move on and get a real job.
Now, either you're gonna get on here and actually give us some content and show us why we need to see you on TV, or you're gonna put on some clothes and go get a real estate license. Or just shut up.
And in general, to just stop talking. Stop trying to cling on to this fame.
They are clinging to middle school as the peak of their glory days.
So how did the actors manage to become seemingly the only ones to not only fail at capitalizing off of nostalgia, but even have people turn against them? The answer in many ways stems from an incredible lack of self-awareness. What do I mean? You see, in general, people are lukewarm at best when it comes to rewatch podcasts. I mean, it's hard to deny that riding on past laurels for a living is kind of lazy, says the guy whose job it is to overthink the interesting things that other people do. I see the irony, don't worry. But in most cases, the logical conclusion when these podcasts are announced is that the hosts were typecast and had limited success finding work when their show ended. But the bills kept piling, so it's either become an electrician or just talk for an hour a week and make more money. I'm not too harsh about it because I do think almost everyone would choose the latter, but people are quick to dislike it because, well, the rest of us aren't getting that choice. And that's not even mentioning the things that individual hosts will do to rub people the wrong way, like throwing shade at co-stars for simply not wanting to participate in the podcast.
Hey, I want everyone to know that we've asked every single person from the show to be on Wizards of Waverly Pod.
Yeah, multiple times over a long period of time.
Everybody, David Henry, Jake T. Austin, we would love to have you on the show. It would be great to have you here.
Or for constantly alluding to a big scandal that they're going to break, but never do.
Please. Spare.
Though before even announcing their podcast, the 3 lead actors for Ned's Declassified, Devin Werkheiser who played Ned Bigby, Lindsay Shaw aka Mose, and Daniel Curtis Lee, better known as Cookie, had expressed interest in doing some kind of revival, especially Devin, who had in the years since participated in online parodies.
You guys are just gonna throw this away?
No. It wasn't even like that, bro. It was
Hey, I get it. It's been a while, but I got you.
Attempts to continue Ned's legacy as somewhat of a lifestyle influencer.
The real life survival guide. First dates. Can you take the pressure off? Can you relax a little bit?
And even tried on his own to revive the series.
I wanted it for you. I wanted it for me, and I thought it would be amazing to make a self-help sitcom for a generation that could use a friend. Cookie and Mose were on board. The original creator and producer, Scott and Michelle Fellows, were on board, but we don't own the rights to Ned's Declassified. So we pitched it to Nickelodeon and Awesomeness TV, who do own the rights to it, and they passed on it and they won't let us take it to sell it somewhere else. So for now, the reboot's dead.
But when none of this leads to a red carpet premiere, then might as well launch a podcast to drum up interest, right? And no matter how you look at it, the podcast started off pretty strong. In fact, the first episode, premiering in February of 2023, is still their most viewed on YouTube. And part of what guided this enthusiasm was actually Devin and Lindsay. In addition to their characters being love interests, spoilers for a 20-year-old kids show, I guess, they had also dated off-screen.
I'm friends with Lindsay. She was my first love, right?
So them coming back together and candidly talking about their relationship while demonstrating a similar level of chemistry.
What's a Lindsay impression?
I mean, you can't capture that.
It's hard to capture. I'm gonna be honest.
It's like a little
it's
bit
all
of,
over the place. It's a little bit of everything.
Snitch.
It led to the exact kind of parasocial enthusiasm and shipping that you would expect. And hell, they weren't shy about leaning into this.
Susie!
Whoa!
Susie's on the dance floor!
Not to mention that it's pretty rare to see cast members from these old childhood shows actually get along and be friends years later. Like any Nickelodeon or Disney Channel show you can name usually had tensions while shooting, many of which go unresolved. And best of all, they confirmed that Ned's Declassified did not have the traumatic environment experienced by many other child actors.
Michael starts off the notes by saying, I'm going to give you your notes all in one time at the end, because if I made everyone sit here through all of the notes I have for you, we would all be here for hours and no one would ever get to go home.
You guys were all kids. Michael couldn't pull this stuff with a gun.
I just opened my eyes, I woke up, and he was assaulting me.
It was such a ridiculously lasting, fun family experience. Like, it still holds such a special place. And not, you know, we've been hearing over the last X amount of years, like, not every set was like that, but ours was.
So if you had fond memories of Ned's Declassified, then what's not to like, right? Clearly this is going to be a wholesome peek behind the curtain thanks to these three best friends.
Dude, I ran through every Ned's cast member before I landed on Devin.
Damn.
Remember that?
The chosen one.
Or not. Yeah, let's talk about how, despite the strong start, they've managed to turn the entire internet against them. Starting with the groundwork laid by Lindsay before the podcast even started. See, in 2021, there was a huge trend on TikTok that stemmed from a group of black friends doing a basic two-step dance. Basically, the original video went viral and inspired a lot of people, including Devin, to green screen themselves dancing with the group when describing a moment that they feel cool. Pretty harmless stuff, right? But Lindsay decided to speak out against the trend for some reason.
Hey, are we okay? What the f is this?
Yeah, this caused a lot of backlash from the black community because, well, why did she feel the need to say anything about this trend in particular? So enough people determined that the answer had to do with either the race of the participants or ignorance surrounding black culture.
Hey, are you okay? Because you're doing a lot of hating on black content creators and black dance moves for absolutely no reason. The issue is how quick people are to discredit black content creators. Lindsay applauds her white co-star when he does the dance, but can't give the respect and the credit to the guys who made it.
Not to mention that black creators often express having to overcome additional hurdles when pursuing content creation, so why are you trying to add to that?
They take a black person's video and a white person's video, and it can be the same exact video, and they restrict the black person's video, but not the white person's video.
And then she tried to apologize, but her apology kinda sucked.
And I know I'm gonna keep learning. I think, like, for my own mental health, I needed to take a step back from social media. I kind of felt like that anyway.
Including the classic "I'm sorry you feel that way" line.
I am sorry you were offended.
As well as emphasizing the backlash she's been getting, possibly in an effort to shift people's focus to feeling sorry for her.
The hate in my inbox is not okay. And this kind of hate just needs to evaporate from the planet, no matter who it's directed towards.
And then both Devin and Daniel came in to try to defend her, but did so in ways that came across as really condescending.
Hey, Lindsay, what it do? Yeah, it's me. Your one black friend. Yeah, let society tell it. Hey, so check this out. You done got yourself into a bit of a pickle, all right? You fumbled the hell out of that bag, right?
So now we have a perceived racial bias and perceived microaggression. That's possibly a good opportunity for education of some ignorance that's being turned into hate and telling her to kill herself in her DMs. So people are out here standing for a principle and standing for people of color, which I get, but I'm also gonna defend my friend's well-being. And for that, I'm being called racist now. And that's the nuance of our time.
Yeah, they said a lot to avoid Lindsay having to just go, my bad, that was a dumb take. I didn't have a bad intention, but you know, that was silly of me, right? So compare this to when, say, the Wizards of Waverly Place rewatch was announced. While the two actors spearheading it were kind of random, none of the three main protagonists partook, David DeLuise was beloved for his sweet and lovable portrayal of Jerry Russo.
It's Derek Moore's who, Alex?
While Jennifer Stone had been making headlines for her recent work as a nurse.
Harper Finkel on Wizards of Waverly Place, but now she's got a new role. She became a nurse and is now working on the front lines during COVID-19.
So at the very least, people's last impression of the actors was positive, even if the move felt a little desperate coming from supporting cast. But now for the Neds trio, instead of their last impression being a sweet ending to a decent show, it was this. A weird, unnecessary controversy that the other two inserted themselves into for seemingly no reason other than their own interest in launching a show. And you can argue all you want about if the controversy was overblown, but that doesn't matter. I'm talking about why people have grown to dislike this trio, and this was absolutely the first domino. But then Lindsay's past created another obstacle for this trio's goal of having a successful podcast they could leverage into a reboot. Yeah, let me walk you through some of the most viral pieces of media from this podcast, period. The top is the trio throwing shade at Zoe 101 for receiving a revival.
I am ready to be a hater.
The second is Lindsay talking about how her past drug addiction affected her career.
When I had my problem, I got called into Pretty Little Liars creator's office, and she was just like, we're gonna let you go. It's not because you're acting, but do you have anybody to talk to? And I was like, no. And she's like, we'll find somebody.
There's also Devin and Lindsay talking about their first time trying oral together at roughly 14.
Do you remember the first that I
What are
gave
you gonna ask on this
Do you
podcast? First what?
BJ.
I actually do. You really want to talk about this on the pod?
I just wanted to say that I felt like a failure from that point because
He didn't finish.
I know. Yep.
No.
You didn't. You didn't. After a moment, he just said, thanks. Okay. And you got up and you went to the bathroom and you did your thing.
No. I don't remember
100%.
that at all.
So which one do you remember? The one on the couch?
No, I remember the one in the backseat of your car. We can't talk about this on the pod.
Wow.
Dude, I can't believe.
We got busy in quite a few places.
Lindsay talking about her overdose.
I overdosed, blacked out for 2 days. I got my stomach pumped. Then when I woke up in a mental facility, two orderlies go, whoop, walked me back in there. And then I was like, holy shit. I have to stay here. And so I had to convince the doctor I was okay. But then 6 months later, it happened to me again.
And most infamously of all, well...
Dude, I ran through every Ned's cast member before I landed on Devin.
Damn.
Remember that?
The chosen one.
Like telling Theo that I liked him and we like held hands at the movies.
He's so mysterious.
And Rob.
Yeah, it's interesting because an understandable fear of these childhood rewatch podcasts is that they would ruin the show for people in one way or another. Like with the Boy Meets World rewatch, they talk very candidly about being put in a very distressing work environment as children.
I think a lot of that also comes from having that kind of environment to grow as an actor to where then you have a love of the craft and you want to go on and pursue it, where a lot of us when we finish Boy we're like, I'm done for a little while.
And while they talk about their experiences in a very mature and sympathetic way, it can still be upsetting for a viewer to hear about. Not to mention everything that has come out about Dan Schneider's alumni.
So I'm sober 16 years because I'm a classic cliche child actor, you know, burned out at 21.
So you were what, drinking?
I was on everything but skates.
And the track record of child stars in general.
LA County Jail in general, I mean, it's just the worst of the worst, bro. You know? I mean, it really is. You know, I don't think it gets much worse. Hopefully not.
Yeah, that's where I only spent a few hours in my DUI. I spent that place.
For sure, yeah.
Don't want to be there long.
Yeah, I was there for 4 years in a 6x9 cell.
Jesus Christ, Adam.
But like I said, the trio has maintained that Scott Fellows, their showrunner, actually maintained a pretty positive environment. So since listeners wouldn't have their nostalgia ruined by learning that the experience was traumatic, they would get to maintain the lighthearted, fun image they have of this childhood show. But instead of focusing on being more wholesome, like with the Office ladies,
the Dundies were based on an awards presentation that Greg Daniels did for his real-life employees on King of the Hill.
I actually can really see Greg doing that. I can see him going and buying them.
It was a morale booster.
Aw, Greg.
Or maybe wholesome with an occasional dose of reality like Pod Meets World. The Ned's Declassified podcast is just uncomfortable. Like, how are you supposed to feel about revisiting an innocent part of your childhood only to find out about the sex lives of middle schoolers you looked up to as a kid?
Oh, dry humping? What base is that? Is that where it stopped?
It's like 1.5.
Did you guys go all the way? Did you knock it out of the park at any point?
No comment.
No comment? No comment? I kind of want to know. What's
They want to know, but no comment.
No comment.
You don't get to know.
Well, then that means they definitely went all the way.
You don't get to know what bases.
Where was this place that you didn't cross that base? Where were you doing that? Isn't it just in your dressing room?
What's wrong now? What is it? Tell me, what is it? It better not be.
And then some have expressed that some of Lindsay's revelations were tasteless, to say to Devin's face. Though personally, I don't really care about that. He seems pretty okay with it. But again, we're talking about how people feel. And that doesn't have to be right or wrong in order to have an effect.
I vaguely remember you kissing Rob while we were together.
No, I didn't.
Pretty sure.
No, I didn't.
Pretty sure.
Nope.
Yep.
When was
back
that?
in Georgia, and I got a call.
No, when was that?
Yep.
When and from who? If you got it from Rob, oh.
So every time one of these clips would go viral, it would shave off more people who were at worst neutral to them. And it can only happen so many times before you start to be seen as having a sort of misfit wildcard vibe. But we've had enough of those types rise and fall online to see that people aren't necessarily open to that vibe anymore. Not to mention that when most people are trying to revisit fond parts of their childhood, I don't think hearing these kinds of stories is really their goal.
I actually vividly remember when people were on the internet specifically asking for a Ned's Declassified reboot. How cool everyone thought it would be for y'all to come out with like an adult's guide to living instead of like a kid's guide to living. And then y'all came out with that godforsaken podcast. And I get it. There are people who were like, why is everybody so up in arms about, you know, grown adults talking about sex on a grown adult podcast? Because it was not marketed that way. Y'all marketed it as a spinoff of the show. It was literally like the Ned's Declassified podcast. And then all y'all ever did was get up there and talk about how Mose was running through the entire cast and people were getting head in the linen closet. The dad from Wizards of Waverly Place, he did his podcast right. Everyone loves his podcast. You want to know why? Because he didn't get on it and talk about how he was humping everybody in between spells. It allowed us to feel like kids again. But nobody can feel like a kid again when y'all are talking about sucking each other off.
Maybe they want to sneak peek into the life of a young Hollywood star, or to hear about struggles they haven't considered of the gig. But I personally didn't need to hear about Mose trying to give Big B that big O. I'm sorry, it was right there. I love wordplay. Anyway. And while I would never disparage someone for struggling with addiction, it's not crazy to think that being fired from a huge show like Pretty Little Liars would be a career ender when you're ultimately an okay actress. Like, yes, RDJ has come back from an addiction that affected his career, but he's also an incredible actor who went on to give arguably the best performance in any modern franchise. Even Lindsay Lohan struggled with addiction and is on somewhat of a comeback. But she's still a better actor than any of the Ned's Declassified crew.
Hurting, like there's like this giant void inside me that I can't seem to fill, and I try and fill it with anything: food, other people, friends, my own voices, you know what I mean? And I'm just sad, and I'm sweaty, and I'm lonely, and I'm itchy, and I'm scratchy, and I'm got a rash, you know, and I'm just not feeling good about anything.
I mean, the flowers that she still receives for convincingly playing two opposite characters in both Parent Trap and Freaky Friday speak for themselves. I talked about this with Shane Dawson, but in Hollywood, people talk. If you're an okay talent who ends up causing a large production money and time, it's easy for that to lead to you being blacklisted.
Because I've been in the acting industry for so long, like, it's such a known thing of like, be careful, like don't burn bridges in this industry of any sort.
So regardless of how you might feel about it, Lindsay's history works against their goal of a reboot in several ways. And while Devin and Daniel didn't really stir up controversy in quite the same way, neither has done much of note since Ned's Declassified ended. Like, the only roles of theirs that I knew about when starting this video was that Daniel was on Zeke and Luther, a mildly successful Disney XD series. And for those of you just now realizing that Kojo was Cookie, how your knees holding up? Whereas all that I knew about from Devin was that he starred in the Nickelodeon movie Shredder Man Rules, which actually debuted right after Ned's finale. Though while Lindsay has managed to be the most controversial of the three, that's not to say that the other two were without controversy, which brings us to Devin's role in this. See, the first half of 2024 saw a lot of discussion about the treatment of child actors by major studios. Most notably, this included Drake Bell detailing years of abuse from a respected adult in the industry.
And he started calling back and calling back. My girlfriend's mom said, "Hey Drake, can I talk to you in the kitchen for a second?" She shuts the door behind me. She's like, "What's going on?" I go, "Oh yeah, Brian, we had plans." She goes, No. A 40-something-year-old man does not call my daughter's boyfriend like that.
And as I had mentioned, this kind of behavior thankfully seems to have been absent from the Ned's Declassified set. So this wave of controversy against Nickelodeon didn't really have the impact on the Ned's trio that it did on many other actors. So Devin went ahead and joked about Drake's experiences to Lindsay and Daniel while they were live streaming. And here's the thing. I've long since maintained that you can joke about anything. It's your intention, perspective, and effort that determines if it's going to land. So if you are going to make a joke about a topic that you know is going to upset people, you better do your homework or else I won't feel bad for you when it backfires. And let's just say that Devin's joke was pretty lazy.
Daniel, we told you never to speak about that. Get back in your hole, Daniel, and give me your holes. Sorry, we shouldn't joke about this. We really shouldn't.
This is awful. Why are we doing this?
Because this is about us. Listen, our set was not like that.
Look, I'm not the type to clutch my pearls about jokes, but come on, man. While this is coming out, that's the best you can do, and you want to be placed in charge of a sitcom. Really? And while they did their obligatory apologies,
we hadn't seen the doc, and everyone was asking us for our opinions on it. Now having seen the documentary, it's so disturbing. I get they were asking us
and we had no clue of the magnitude of what they were discussing.
If I had just watched especially that third episode and then watched us joking like that,
you would be upset.
I would be like, are they sociopaths?
This inevitably shaved away even more of their potential audience. Yeah, when the entire internet is united in a certain cause and you rely on the internet to make a living, you might want to be a smidge more mindful about this kind of thing, right? And Cookie honestly is pretty chill. Other than him making some people angry during their other controversies, Daniel Curtis Lee is mostly just along for the ride and chilling, which good for him. Like, in comparison to what makes Devin and Lindsay go viral, Daniel's most viral clip is actually pretty wholesome.
You were my first kiss?
You were
that was
my first kiss. That was your first kiss?
Hold on!
Are you serious?
Are you
what?
Nervous energy?
Dude, no, for real. I didn't want to make it awkward because we were homies too. Damn, but I practiced. I practiced because I was like, I don't want to mess this up.
had no
What's a good
idea.
kiss? What's a bad kiss? I don't know what to do.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm just watching like this.
Yes. I tell everyone, Cookie was my first kiss.
Anyway, beyond earlier controversies, Devin's actually the one who was spearheading the push to make a revival happen, being the one to pitch the idea to Nickelodeon. But, it didn't go over well.
I thought of it, and so did Scott Fellows, who created Ned's, but we don't own the IP for Ned's, so we developed an idea. We pitched it to the studio who owns the IP. They loved it because our pitch was fire. And as of now, they're just passing on it. That's it. Oh, that's the thing that people might not know. They're like, why don't you take it to Netflix? They own it. If they don't give us permission to license it, we can't. And we asked, let us take it and we'll pay you. And they still were like, no, we're gonna hold on to it. And just it was just an email. That also hurt.
And when he talks about this, he has this attitude where doing the reboot is just so obvious because it'll print money.
It's beyond what I want. It just seems right and obvious. Because I interact with the fans all the time. We're all grown now.
Right.
All the generation that love Ned's is in adulthood now. The format of having a relatable adult character talking to adults about modern adulthood through the camera, that show writes itself.
It does.
And I'm sorry, but all evidence currently suggests otherwise. All of the TV revivals of the past decade, almost all of which were for more successful shows, were suddenly canceled after a short run. Girl Meets World, That 90s Show, How I Met Your Father, iCarly. None of them got to actually finish the plot lines they started.
Oh my God.
Mom? You got a mom?
And even if you take a massive show like Avatar, a show that is again being revisited, its revival, Legend of Korra, had a disjointed story because executives kept playing chicken with renewals, meaning that the finale of seasons 1, 2, and 4 all had to act as a satisfying series finale. And that's arguably the best received nostalgia reboot. What's more, this genius reboot that Devin's describing, let me know if you've heard this one before.
The Ned's reboot would have to be Ned in adulthood, trying to find his way, and I think the most beautiful ending would be him actually finding his true adult purpose back in teaching. But he would have to go on a journey to get there. That's not where we begin. And then he meets the little past him. He sees
chills.
this kid who's struggling, but wants to help another kid with tips.
and then bam, that's the end of the reboot.
So Ned's going to be a child that we follow from around 11 into adulthood, where he's trying to find his way before realizing that he's meant to be a teacher. So he likely marries his middle school sweetheart before dedicating himself to teaching the next generation, with a special focus on a child who he sees much of himself in. And hey, maybe there'll be some guest appearances from his best friend who's pretty different from him, but loyal nonetheless.
What you doing with that shovel, buddy?
I was in Philadelphia!
It's Corey Matthews. It's literally just Corey Matthews. And I acknowledge that I previously compared Boy Meets World to Ned's Declassified, but like, it's the exact same premise as Girl Meets World, but with much less build-up.
In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart.
Also, having a character that we follow while they were at school become a teacher feels really generic.
Students, if they can do it, why not us?
I'm your wizard tutor, Justin Russo.
This is physics class, and physics is awesome.
This is Architecture 101. I am Professor Mosby.
You're gonna be my karate teacher?
I'm gonna be your sensei.
It worked with Corey because the most iconic character by far of the Boy Meets World universe was Mr. Feeney, a teacher who was present for the entirety of the show's 7-season run.
Do good.
Don't you mean do well?
No, I mean do good.
Whereas here, name a single teacher from Ned's Declassified. Not describe. Give me a name. Let alone one who would have that much of an impact on Ned. Like, the character was usually butting heads with almost all of his teachers. They were usually presented as antagonists.
If you're late for class tomorrow, you get an F.
A teacher whose goal is to destroy you, teacher.
Mr. Bigby, looking forward to seeing you today.
It means this is your last day in this school forever. Bring.
If anything, his mentor was the janitor Gordy.
And say thank you, Gordy.
You realize your locker's the first thing I've actually cleaned all year?
But that wouldn't really make sense for a show about Ned finding his calling unless it was like some kind of black comedy. But even then, Devin talks about this idea as if the executives preventing it are stupid for doing so.
What's the holdup?
Paramount.
Ugh, this is what the people want.
That's what I'm saying.
How can you not?
That's what I'm saying. And like, if the universe doesn't want it for me, okay, okay, but like,
please.
It feels so obvious and like a win-win-win. It's a win for us personally. It's a win for the audience. It would be a win for the studio because it's positive. Ned's was always so positive. The heart of the show was truly wanting to connect to an audience and help them. So I feel like it writes itself for adulthood.
Which I gotta say, doesn't feel like a winning strategy for changing their minds, you know? And in general, I don't think Devin has a good grasp of how popular Ned's was in the grand scheme of things.
20 years since our faces became synonymous with your childhood.
Look, I like Ned's more than the average person, but I unironically think there are at least 50 faces that would come to mind from my childhood before anyone from Ned's. And I get it, because Ned's Declassified is a big part of his life, and rightfully so. But even if you were to bring back a show that ran on Nickelodeon from 2004 to 2007, I think more people would be asking for Danny Phantom, or Drake and Josh. Hell, even if you specifically wanted a reboot of a Nickelodeon show that followed an average middle schooler from 2004 to 2007, I think many would opt for Unfabulous, which has far more star power thanks to Emma Roberts. Now, if you remember the first TikTok I had shown you, it was the trio comparing their possible reboot to Zoe 101's, which had received a direct-to-streaming movie, Zoe 102, which, spoilers, the movie undoes the ending of the show only to redo it. Like, if you don't watch the movie, everyone ends up where you assume they would based on the show's finale. For example, the two leads start a relationship during the series finale, but the movie is about them being broken up and getting back together at the wedding of the second main couple of the show. You know, the other two that ended up together during the finale.
I love Quinn Penske.
And I love Logan Reese.
Which I bring up not just because it bothered me, but because it shows that a lot of these reboots really don't make sense in the context of the story. For another example, just look at the Wizards reboot. While Justin spent the original series being overly enthusiastic about magic and finding his passion for teaching,
allow me to introduce Professor Russo, who's taking my place as headmaster of WizTech.
He starts the Wizards reboot having turned his back on magic and giving up teaching it.
I've been picked up a wand since I got fired from WizTech.
But don't you miss it? You know, teaching wizards?
No, I don't even think about it every day.
I wonder if by the end he's going to rediscover his love for both and continue doing them, meaning he would end up exactly where he did during the finale.
I'm so glad you started teaching again. You're so good at it.
And in the case of Ned's, there's no context where you're getting an ensemble of characters who went to middle school together in a plot that isn't going to feel forced.
And Cookie is like at a startup tech company. He's making good money, but he's not fulfilled. But he sees Ned down in the 20s dumps and calls in backup. Moe's.
Like, spoilers again, but Ned and Moe's ending up together, there's nothing you could do to follow that up that would feel satisfying. High school sweethearts get married all the time, but middle school ones? So if Ned and Moe's are still together in the reboot, it's going to feel forced. Hell, people still say that Corey and Topanga was forced, and that was with us spending over double the time on their relationship. But if Ned and Moe's aren't together, it's going to feel like it goes against the ending of the show. And if the story is them getting back together, then you're undoing the finale just to redo it, which is dumb. Like, already you have so many holes in why this reboot wouldn't make sense, and that's just based on a relatively small part of making it work. Not to mention that it's weird to compare Zoe 101 to Ned's when all of the Dan Schneider shows of this era, including Zoe 101, were much more iconic and successful. Like, yes, iCarly got a reboot, but people still quote 3 of their main characters all of the time because it was a much more iconic show.
You steal my motorcycle. I don't have you arrested. And then I come home to find you chewing on my sister's face.
What is that? A sock full of butter. Hi, ma'am. I'm Gibby.
She doesn't speak English.
I'm still Gibby.
And Wizards of Waverly Place won a Primetime Emmy, and it still took Selena Gomez to make a revival happen.
Surprise!
I mean, in general, it feels like the Ned's trio has this strange attitude that they're entitled to getting their turn at a reboot.
Let's be real. They favor Dan Schneider content. They always have. He created like half the
Schneider's Bakery,
universe.
man.
But that's not how anything works. And while these negative feelings towards this group have been brewing, it all boiled over recently with Lindsay Shaw coming out and saying this.
I just don't understand how Spider-Man can be remade 437,896 times and then Declassified can't even get reboot once. Not even reboot once for a crappy TV movie. Just let us have a crappy TV movie.
And while at first glance that clip might seem ridiculous, that's only because it is. But I do think it perfectly demonstrates the issues I'm talking about. One, the entitlement. Because on one side of her comparison, you have arguably the most popular character in all of fiction, one that has made billions of dollars in revenue. While on the other side, you have a decent show about a middle school from 20 years ago. Like, if we were to take the worst received Spider-Man projects of this century, they are all still more impactful and relevant than this show. No joke, if you showed me that sentence out of context, I would assume you were talking about like Superman or Darth Vader, you know, 2 of the other most popular characters in all of fiction. But 2, it's strange that Lindsay still uses social media as a way to express off-the-cuff opinions when she's clearly not good at it. Like, look, I don't have a problem with Lindsay. I do think she can be charming. I liked her performance on Ned's. This isn't me trying to be mean. But we now have, at minimum, 3 separate instances of her just trying to shoot the breeze and invoking a genuinely negative reaction from people. And nowadays, that's kind of the peak of her engagement. Like, at a certain point, it may be time to accept that hot takes are not going to be your shtick with doing social media. And hey, it takes one to know one. My videos are consistently better received the more scripted they are. But in the way that Devin tries to make himself kind of a comforting figure like Steve Burns, I think Lindsay needs to find what people want to see from her. And I do think that this general air of entitlement from all 3 of them was the last straw for the internet turning against them. You probably don't need me to tell you that people broadly don't have a lot of sympathy for people working in desirable fields like the arts. I mean, think back to the recent Hollywood strikes. The main issue was that the executives at the top were hoarding the profits generated by the creatives at the bottom, who were doing the actual work. It sounds a lot like what every industry is dealing with these days, but there was a very reactionary group who responded to these grievances by saying that if you were getting paid at all to work on a piece of media, then you have no reason to complain, which insinuates that they'd rather the money go towards making the rich richer than be given to a middle-class writer or actor.
87% of SAG-AFTRA actors cannot even earn enough to qualify for health insurance. You need $26,000 to qualify for health insurance. They can't get to that. Meanwhile, the corporations are raking in record profits.
So imagine these 3 people saying that one of their biggest problems is that they're not still making money from something they did 20 years ago as actors. At a time where the main concern on people's minds is how difficult it is to afford to, well, exist, and do so in jobs that are much harder than acting. I mean, at the end of the day, they started a podcast to try and increase interest. They pitched the idea to the network. They rallied whatever fans there were. The hustle is commendable. They've worked hard to try to make this a reality. But at a certain point, it's hard to not see this as the trio trying to avoid having to get a quote-unquote real job at any cost. Also, they all charge a lot on Cameo, so depending on how often they're getting requests, they could be making quite a bit of money from that. Yet somehow that's not enough good fortune. They're just expecting a show that there clearly isn't enough demand for. And like I said before, I think this comes down to a serious disconnect between how big and important this show was in their lives compared to well, everyone else. And in some ways, it seems that this nostalgia industry might be coming to an end. See, Christy Carlson Romano is known for her performance in various Disney Channel projects, and has become somewhat of a trendsetter with these retrospective podcasts.
I'm Christy Carlson Romano.
And this is I Hear Voices.
It's the Even More Stevens podcast.
Our new podcast. Big Name Jay!
At The Vulnerable Podcast.
This show is called Christy's Kitchen Throwback, where that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm cooking in the kitchen with my favorite throwback stars.
This led to her eventually launching a network, Podco, which partners with many of the rewatch podcasts I've talked about, including Ned's, where Podco basically provides these podcasts with resources and support in exchange for sharing the revenue. But in the wake of Lindsay's Spider-Man clips, the trio suddenly announced that they were going to be parting ways with Podco.
We're under new management.
Yeah, it's us now. We're all going in different directions. They're dropping some shows. So we are now production company-less, but
we independent.
Yeah, which is cool. But it also means we have a lot to figure out in the next coming months. We definitely want to continue the pod in some form. We got to figure out what that looks like. Yeah. And so stay tuned for details for that.
And they ended it with what's, in my opinion, a very shoehorned reboot teaser.
All right, are we ready for the exciting stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, guys. When we started this pod 2 years ago, we always hoped that it could lead to a reboot.
Which to me feels mostly like a desperate attempt to keep people engaged, but whatever. And in fact, going to Podco's website, it's suddenly empty. Instead of showcasing the shows they've partnered with, it's just a splash screen, which has led some to speculate that the network might be shutting down. But either way, whether the Ned's podcast was dropped or the company is going under, I can't see how either possibility does anything but make this potential reboot seem like even more of a pipe dream. Either the market is starting to reject nostalgia baiting, or it's them specifically that are the problem. And while normally this is when I try to say what they should be doing to make this reboot happen, honestly, I don't know if I see a path to that at all. The Rewatch podcast is already allowing them to profit off of old work way more than most people can. And while it is unfortunate that, unlike most actors, the stars of Nickelodeon shows aren't able to collect on residuals.
No residuals on kids' TV.
I get residuals from Drake and Josh.
I don't. You get residuals?
Yo, I get checks all the time for my 3 words that I said.
Stop it.
Are you okay?
In between seasons, we were like, okay, the show's doing well. Let's renegotiate these residuals. They're like, we'll recast Ned right now.
At a certain point, it's time to just move on. Let it go. Let the past be in the past. Hell, just look at Dylan and Cole Sprouse. When Sweet Life on Deck ended, they tried their hardest to get a 3rd show to be made.
If we're gonna do one last season, it's gonna be on our terms. We're gonna produce it. And it'll be a setup for a new show. The reason we want to do that too was because it would also set up all the cast and crew we've worked with for 60 years. So they would not lose their jobs in our decision to go to college in real life. And so they would continue to work, and we would also be making money off the producership. They told us no to that idea.
But when that didn't work out,
they pitched us our idea in Miami with Selena Gomez. And Cole and I turned to each other, and we basically laughed in their face and walked out. And that was the last meeting we had with Disney.
They both moved on in their careers.
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in, and I don't want to fit in.
Maybe the Ned's crew should start taking some notes. You might say that I'm being a bit hypocritical here, because criticizing people who are desperate to profit off of nostalgia baiting is still me profiting off of nostalgia bait, and being all meta and cutesy about it doesn't make it any less of a sin. To which I would obviously have to say, that is a really good point.